Under the cold, punishing rain, Claire Whitmore kneels at her late husband's grave. But her grief is about to become a nightmare. Her wealthy in-laws just made her a brutal offer: marry the feared and paralyzed crime lord Damian Cross or lose everything. They think they're throwing her into hell. But they don't know that the man in the wheelchair is hiding a dangerous secret. And when he stands up, the whole world will tremble. Follow my story to the end. Hit like and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's start from the beginning. The rain fell like punishment. Cold, relentless, hammering down on the black umbrellas and polished headstones until the cemetery felt less like sacred ground and more like a drowning pit. Claire Whitmore didn't bother with an umbrella. She knelt in the mud beside the fresh grave, her dress soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face, and her hands pressed flat against the cold marble stone that bore her husband's name. Michael Whitmore, beloved son. 1995 to 2024. Beloved son, not beloved husband. The Whitmores had made sure of that. Claire's fingers traced the engraved letters, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. It had been 3 weeks since the accident. 3 weeks since the phone call that shattered her world. 3 weeks since she became a widow at 24 years old. And now, kneeling here in the rain, she realized she had nothing left. No Michael. No home. His family had made that clear. No future. Just grief, cold and heavy, pressing down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice cut through the rain like a blade. Claire looked up slowly, water streaming down her face, and saw them standing a few feet away. Richard Whitmore, Michael's father, tall and silver-haired, his expensive coat pristine despite the storm, and beside him, Ethan Whitmore, Michael's younger brother, 26 and smug, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored jacket. Richard's expression was cold, clinical, like he was looking at a broken appliance he needed to dispose of. "We need to talk," Richard said. Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand, though it did nothing. "Not here." "Yes, here." Richard stepped closer, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. "Because you've been avoiding my calls, and frankly, we're done being patient." Ethan smirked. "You've had your grieving time, Claire. Now it's time to face reality." She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, her hands still trembling. "What do you want?" Richard's jaw tightened. "The house." Claire blinked. "What?" "The house Michael bought for you," Richard said, his tone flat and businesslike. "It was purchased with Whitmore money, company money, money that legally reverts to the estate now that my son is gone." "That's not—" Claire's voice cracked. "That's not true. Michael bought that house for us. It's in both our names." Actually," Ethan said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket, "it's in his name. And since he's dead, it belongs to the estate, which belongs to Dad." He held out the paper. Claire stared at it, her vision blurring. "You're lying." "We're not," Richard said coldly. "Check the deed yourself. Michael never transferred ownership. An oversight, I'm sure. But an expensive one for you." Claire felt the ground tilt beneath her. "You can't do this." "We already have." Richard's eyes were ice. "You have 2 weeks to vacate the property." 2 weeks? Claire's voice broke into something raw and desperate. "I have nowhere to go." "That's not our problem," Ethan said. He was enjoying this. She could see it in his eyes. Richard raised a hand, silencing his son. "Actually, we do have a solution." Claire's stomach twisted. "What?" Richard stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his pale eyes. "There's a man. His name is Damian Cross." The name hit her like a punch. Everyone knew that name. Damian Cross, crime lord, rumored to control half the city's underground operations. A man so dangerous that even the police didn't touch him. And 3 months ago, there'd been an accident, an explosion at one of his properties. He'd survived. Barely. The rumors said he was paralyzed, broken, a ghost of what he'd been. "No," Claire whispered. "He needs a wife," Richard continued, ignoring her. "For legal reasons, appearances. We've been in discussions with his people for weeks." "You've been—" Claire's voice rose. "You've been selling me?" "Don't be dramatic," Ethan said. "It's a business arrangement. You marry Cross, you keep the house. Simple." "He's a criminal." He's rich, Richard corrected. And more importantly, he's useful to us. This marriage solidifies a partnership that benefits the Whitmore family considerably. Claire took a step back, shaking her head. No, I won't do it. Oh, then you'll be homeless, Richard said simply. And penniless. Because the money Michael left you, that's tied up in probate. And I control the estate. You won't see a cent. Ethan grinned. You could always get a job, I guess. What are you qualified for again? Oh, right. Nothing. The cruelty was casual, effortless, like stepping on an insect. Claire's hands clenched into fists. Michael would never. Michael is dead, Richard snapped, and for the first time there was emotion in his voice, sharp, jagged anger. And you were a mistake from the beginning, a distraction. He married you against my advice, and now look where we are. The words hit like stones. You have 48 hours to decide, Richard said, his voice returning to its cold, controlled tone. Marry Damian Cross, or lose everything. Your choice. He turned and walked away, his shoes crunching on the gravel path. Ethan lingered for a moment, his smirk widening. For what it's worth, he said, I hear Cross can't even walk anymore, so at least you won't have to worry about him touching you. Then he followed his father, leaving Claire standing alone in the rain beside her husband's grave. She sank to her knees again, her whole body shaking, and for the first time since Michael died, she let herself break completely. 48 hours. That's all she had. Claire sat in the small house, Michael's house, their house, staring at the contract on the kitchen table. It was thick, official, stamped with legal seals and signatures she didn't recognize. The terms were laid out in cold, clinical language. Marriage contract between Claire Whitmore and Damian Cross. She'd read it 3 times. Each time it felt more surreal. She would marry him, live with him, play the role of his wife in public. In exchange, she would keep the house, receive a monthly allowance, and maintain her legal status as a Whitmore, at least on paper. There was no mention of love, no mention of partnership. It was a transaction. Nothing more. Claire's hands trembled as she picked up the pen. She thought about running, disappearing, starting over somewhere far away, but with what money? What skills? She had a degree in art history and 3 years of marriage to a man whose family had never let her work. She had no savings, no family of her own. Her parents had died when she was 19, and Michael had been all she had left. Now even he was gone. The pen hovered over the signature line. What would Michael want? The question burned in her chest. But she already knew the answer. Michael had been kind, gentle. He would have told her to fight, to stand up for herself. But Michael wasn't here, and Claire was so tired of fighting alone. She signed her name. Boom. The car arrived the next morning, a black SUV with tinted windows, sleek and expensive, pulling up to the curb like a hearse. The driver didn't get out, didn't speak, just waited. Claire stood in the doorway of the house, a single suitcase in her hand. She'd packed light, clothes, a few photos. Michael's watch, which she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. The door of the SUV opened. A woman stepped out, tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a pristine gray suit. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression was unreadable. Mrs. Cross, the woman said. Claire flinched. I'm not. You signed the contract. You're Mrs. Cross. The woman's tone left no room for argument. My name is Margaret. I manage Mr. Cross's household. You'll follow my instructions. Claire swallowed. Where is he? At the estate. Waiting. Margaret's eyes flicked to the suitcase. Is that all? Yes. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Pity, maybe, or judgment. Get in. The drive was long. They left the city behind, winding through dense forests and empty roads until they reached a massive iron gate. It opened automatically, and the SUV rolled through onto a private road lined with trees. And then the estate came into view. It was enormous, a sprawling mansion of dark stone and tall windows surrounded by manicured lawns and high walls. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, beautiful and isolated and vaguely menacing. Margaret parked in front of the main entrance. Come. Claire followed her inside. The interior was just as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, marble floors, expensive art on the walls. Everything was pristine, cold, and silent. "Mr. Cross is in the East Wing," Margaret said, leading her down a long hallway. "He spends most of his time there. You'll have your own room in the West Wing." "My own room?" Margaret glanced back. "This is a professional arrangement, Mrs. Cross, not a romance." Claire's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. Margaret knocked once, then pushed it open. "Mr. Cross, your wife is here." Claire stepped inside. The room was large, dimly lit, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate grounds. In the center of the room, facing the windows, was a wheelchair, and in the wheelchair sat Damien Cross. He didn't turn to look at her. From behind, she could see the breadth of his shoulders, the dark hair that fell just past his collar, the stillness of his posture. He wore a simple black shirt and slacks, and his hands rested motionless on the arms of the chair. Margaret cleared her throat. "Mr. Cross, this is Claire." Still, he didn't move. Claire's heart pounded. She didn't know what she'd expected, violence maybe, or cruelty, or the cold arrogance she'd seen in Richard Whitmore. But this silence, it was worse. "I'll leave you to get acquainted," Margaret said, and before Claire could protest, the door clicked shut behind her. Claire stood frozen, her pulse racing. Say something, move, do something. But Damien Cross remained perfectly still, staring out the window as if she didn't exist. Finally, Claire found her voice. "Mr. Cross?" Nothing. She took a hesitant step forward. I'm Claire. You're... I know who you are." His voice stopped her cold. It was deep, rough, and completely devoid of emotion. Slowly, the wheelchair turned, and Claire saw his face for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, 32. His features were sharp, almost severe, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, dark eyes that seemed to look straight through her. There was a faint scar along his left temple, disappearing into his hairline. He was handsome, devastatingly so, and he was looking at her like she was a problem he hadn't asked for. "Sit," he said. Claire hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair across from him. Damien's gaze didn't waver. "You signed the contract." "Yes." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. What? Why did you sign it?" His tone was flat, clinical. "You could have refused." Claire's throat tightened. "And lose everything." "So you chose this?" "I chose to survive," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or interest, but it was gone before she could be sure. "You'll have your own room," Damien said. "Your own space. You won't be disturbed. In public, you'll play the role of my wife. In private, we don't have to speak." Claire stared at him. "That's it?" "That's it." "Then why do you need a wife at all?" Damien's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern." The dismissal stung, but Claire bit back her response. What was the point? This wasn't a marriage. It was a cage. "Margaret will show you to your room," Damien said, turning his wheelchair back toward the window. "You're free to explore the estate. Just stay out of my way." Claire stood slowly, her hands trembling. "Is there anything else?" "No." She walked to the door, her chest tight, her mind spinning. But just before she stepped out, his voice stopped her. "Claire." She turned. Damien didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the window, on the dark trees beyond. "Welcome to your new life." The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. The days blurred together. Claire's room was large, elegant, and utterly impersonal. A bed with crisp white sheets, a desk, a window overlooking the grounds. It felt like a hotel room, temporary, hollow. She barely saw Damien. Margaret brought her meals on a tray, told her where she could go and where she couldn't. The East Wing was off limits. So was Damien's office. The library was fine, the gardens were fine, everything else was a gray area. Claire spent most of her time alone. She walked the grounds, read books she didn't care about, stared out the window at the sprawling lawns, and wondered how her life had become this. But at night, she heard him. Damien's room was down the hall from hers, and sometimes, late, when the house was silent, she heard the sound of wheels on the marble floor. The soft creak of his wheelchair moving through the halls. She never saw him, but she knew he was there, and it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. 2 weeks passed before she worked up the courage to speak to him again. It was late afternoon, and she'd been wandering the mansion, restless and bored, when she found herself outside the east wing. The door was ajar. She knew she shouldn't. Margaret had been clear. But something pulled her forward. Curiosity, maybe, or defiance, or just the desperate need to understand the man she'd been shackled to. She pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the fading sunlight through the windows. And there, in the center of the room, was Damien. He sat in his wheelchair, his back to her, his head bowed slightly, as if in thought. Claire's breath caught. "You're not supposed to be here." His voice was quiet, calm, but it carried weight. "I know," Claire said. "I'm sorry. I just what?" She hesitated. "I wanted to see you." Damien turned his wheelchair slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Why?" Claire didn't have a good answer. "Because you're my husband. On paper. Still." For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Damien's expression softened, just barely. "You're bored." Claire blinked. "What?" "You're bored," he repeated. "You have nothing to do, nowhere to go, so you came looking for me." It was true, and the bluntness of it stung. "I'm sorry," she said again, turning to leave. "Wait." She stopped. Damien studied her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Claire hesitated, then obeyed. "You want to know why I needed a wife?" Damien said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the arms of the wheelchair. 3 months ago, there was an explosion at one of my properties. I was there. I survived. Barely. Claire's throat tightened. She'd heard the rumors, but hearing it from him was different. "I was in a coma for 2 weeks," Damien continued. "When I woke up, I couldn't move my legs. The doctor said it might be permanent." "I'm sorry," Claire whispered. Damien's eyes narrowed. "Don't be." "I'm not." The coldness in his voice startled her. "When people see weakness," Damien said slowly, "they take advantage. Business partners, rivals, even family. Everyone wants a piece of what you have when they think you can't defend it." Claire's chest tightened. She understood that feeling all too well. "So I needed someone," Damien said. "A wife? Someone to stand beside me in public, to show the world I'm still in control. And you chose me." "I chose you," he confirmed, "because you had nothing to lose, and because the Whitmores owed me a favor." The words landed like stones. Claire looked down at her hands. "So I'm just a prop?" "Yes." The honesty was brutal, but then Damien's voice softened, just slightly. "But you're here now, and that means something." Claire looked up, searching his face for meaning, but his expression was unreadable. "You can go," Damien said, turning his wheelchair back toward the window. Claire stood slowly, but this time she didn't leave right away. "Mr. Cross?" "What?" "Do you ever get lonely?" The question hung in the air. Damien didn't answer, and Claire, after a long moment, walked out. After that, things changed. Not dramatically, but slowly, quietly. Claire started spending more time in the East Wing. At first, she told herself it was just curiosity, but the truth was simpler. Damien was the only person in the house who treated her like she existed. He didn't talk much, but when she sat with him, he didn't send her away. She'd sit in the chair across from him and talk. About nothing, mostly. About the books she was reading, about the gardens, about the rain. Damien never responded, but he listened, and that was enough. One evening, she found him staring out the window again, his expression distant. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Miss what?" "Walking." Damien's jaw tightened. "Every day." Claire's chest ached. "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing." His voice was sharp, but not unkind. "It's not your fault." "I know, but nothing." He turned his wheelchair to face her. "You don't owe me pity, Claire." "I'm not pitying you." "Then what are you doing?" She met his gaze. "I'm just here." Something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't name. Why? He asked quietly. Claire swallowed. Because no one else is. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Claire felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. The weeks turned into a month. Claire's life settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. She explored the estate, tended the gardens, read in the library, and every evening she sat with Damien. They didn't talk about anything important, but the silence between them grew warmer, less hostile. And slowly, Claire began to see past the cold exterior. Damien was sharp, intelligent. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and despite everything, he was kind, in his own way. He never raised his voice at her, never dismissed her, and when she talked about Michael, about the grief that still sat heavy in her chest, he listened without judgment. You loved him, Damien said one night. Claire nodded. I did. And now? She looked down at her hands. Now, I don't know what I feel. Damien's gaze was steady. You feel guilty. Claire's breath hitched. How did you... Because I know what guilt looks like. His voice was quiet. You think you should still be mourning, but you're here, and part of you is not unhappy. Tears pricked Claire's eyes. That makes me terrible. No, Damien said firmly. It makes you human. The kindness in his voice broke something inside her, and for the first time in months, Claire cried in front of someone who didn't look away. But the peace didn't last. One morning, Claire woke to the sound of shouting. She threw on a robe and rushed downstairs, her heart pounding. In the foyer, Margaret stood rigid, her face pale, and in front of her were Richard and Ethan Whitmore. Claire's stomach dropped. What are you doing here? She demanded. Richard's smile was cold. We came to check on you. Make sure you're settling in. Get out. Relax, Claire, Ethan said, smirking. We're family. You're not my family. Legally, we are. Richard's eyes gleamed. And we have a right to know how our investment is doing. Claire's hands clenched into fists. I'm not your investment. Aren't you? Richard stepped closer. You're living in luxury because of us. Don't forget that. Mr. Whitmore. Margaret's voice was ice. You need to leave. Richard ignored her. Where's Cross? That's none of your business. Oh, I think it is. Richard's smile widened. After all, we brokered this deal. We deserve to see the man we sold you to. The words hit Claire like a slap. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the room. Get out! Everyone turned. Damien sat in his wheelchair at the top of the stairs, his expression carved from stone. Richard's smile faltered. Mr. Cross, I didn't realize... I said get out. Damien's voice was deadly quiet. Now. Richard's face darkened. We have every right. You have no rights here. Damien's gaze was cold enough to freeze blood. This is my house, and if you ever set foot on my property again, I'll make sure you regret it. For a moment, Richard looked like he might argue, but then he saw Damien's eyes, and he backed down. Come on, Ethan, Richard muttered, turning toward the door. Ethan hesitated, his gaze flicking to Claire. Enjoy your new life, Claire. I'm sure it's everything you dreamed of. The door slammed behind them. Claire stood frozen, her whole body trembling. Damien wheeled himself down the ramp toward her. Are you all right? She nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. They won't come back, Damien said quietly. Claire looked up at him, her eyes burning. Thank you. Damien's expression softened, just barely. You're my wife. No one touches you. And in that moment, Claire realized something that terrified her. She was starting to feel safe with him. Man. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in the foyer over and over. You're my wife. No one touches you. It shouldn't have meant anything. It was just a statement of fact. But it felt like more. Finally, she gave up on sleep and wandered into the hallway. The house was silent, dark. But there was a light coming from Damien's room. Claire hesitated, then knocked softly. Come in. She pushed the door open. Damien sat by the window, his wheelchair angled toward the glass. He didn't look at her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No. Neither can I." Claire stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Do you mind if I stay?" Damien glanced at her, then gestured to the chair beside him. She sat. For a long time they didn't speak. They just sat together in the quiet, watching the moonlight spill across the grounds. And for the first time since Michael died, Claire felt something other than grief. She felt hope. The next morning, Claire woke to the sound of rain. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, expecting to find Margaret or one of the staff. Instead, she found Damien. He was in the dining room, sitting at the head of the table, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Good morning," he said. Claire blinked. "You're up early." "I don't sleep much." She hesitated, then sat down across from him. A staff member appeared, setting a plate of food in front of her. "Thank you," Claire murmured. Damien watched her, his gaze unreadable. "Your birthday is next week," he said. Claire froze. "How did you? It's in the contract." "Right. Of course." "I don't really celebrate anymore," Claire said quietly. "Why not?" She shrugged. "It doesn't feel right. Not after—" Damien nodded slowly. "I understand." And somehow she believed he did. "But," Damien said, setting down his cup, "you should still do something, even if it's small." Claire looked up at him, surprised. "Why?" Damien's expression was serious. "Because you're still here, and that matters." The words settled over her like a blanket, and Claire realized with a jolt that she was starting to care what he thought. Yet, the week passed quickly, and on the morning of her birthday, Claire woke to find a single white rose on her nightstand. No note, no explanation, just the rose. Her chest tightened. She dressed quickly and went looking for Damien. She found him in the library, reading. "Did you—" She held up the rose. Damien glanced at it, then back at his book. Margaret must have left it, but his voice was too casual, too controlled. Claire smiled. "Thank you." Damien didn't respond, but as she turned to leave, she heard him speak, so quietly she almost missed it. "Happy birthday, Claire." And her heart did something dangerous. It started to fall. Claire stood in the library doorway, the white rose still in her hand, her heart doing things she didn't want to name. Damien had already returned to his book, his face unreadable, as if those 3 words, "Happy birthday, Claire," hadn't just cracked something open inside her chest. She wanted to say something. Thank you again, maybe. Or ask him why he bothered. But the moment felt fragile, like speaking would shatter it, so she just stood there, holding the rose until Damien glanced up. "Was there something else?" he asked. "No," Claire said quickly. No, thank you." She left before he could respond, her pulse racing, her thoughts tangled. Back in her room, she set the rose in a glass of water on the windowsill and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it. It was just a flower. A simple gesture, but it felt like more. It felt like he saw her. Not as the widow Richard Whitmore had sold off, not as the inconvenient wife in a contract marriage, just her. And that terrified her, because Claire knew what happened when you let yourself feel too much. She'd loved Michael with everything she had, and when he died, it nearly destroyed her. She couldn't do that again, couldn't let herself fall for someone who couldn't. She stopped the thought before it could finish. Damien was her husband on paper, nothing more. He'd made that clear from the beginning, but then why did her chest ache every time he looked at her? The rest of the day passed quietly. Margaret brought lunch to her room, a small plate of pasta and a slice of cake she hadn't asked for but suspected Damien had ordered. Claire ate alone, watching the rain streak down the window, and tried not to think about the man down the hall. By evening, the rain had stopped, and the sky had cleared into a cold, brittle twilight. Claire wandered down to the library again, restless and unable to sit still, and found Damien exactly where she'd left him. "You're still reading?" she asked, stepping inside. Damien glanced up. "I don't have much else to do." Claire moved closer, her curiosity getting the better of her. "What is it?" He held up the book, a thick leather-bound volume with no title on the spine. "History, specifically the fall of empires. Cheerful. The corner of Damien's mouth twitched, almost a smile. It's instructive. Claire sat down in the chair across from him, tucking her legs beneath her. What does it teach you? That power is fragile, Damien said, setting the book aside. That the moment you stop paying attention, someone takes it from you. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something sharp and bitter. Is that what happened to you? Claire asked quietly. Someone tried to take your power? Damien's gaze sharpened. Why do you ask? Because you said the explosion wasn't an accident. He didn't confirm or deny it, just watched her. Was it? Claire pressed. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. Then he leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. There are people who think I'm weak now, vulnerable. They're wrong, but I'm letting them believe it. Why? Because it's easier to see your enemies when they think you can't fight back. The words sent a chill down Claire's spine. That sounds dangerous. It is. Damien's eyes didn't leave hers. But so is showing your hand too early. Claire's throat tightened. And me? Am I part of that strategy? You're part of the image, Damien said bluntly. A stable marriage suggests stability, control. It makes people hesitate. So I'm a shield. Yes. The honesty stung, but Claire appreciated it more than pretty lies. And when you don't need the shield anymore? She asked. Damien's gaze softened, just barely. Then we'll renegotiate. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a threat either. Claire nodded slowly, her chest tight. Okay. Okay, Damien echoed. They sat in silence for a while, the library filled with nothing but the faint crackle of the fireplace and the distant hum of the estate settling into night. Finally, Claire spoke. Can I ask you something? You just did. She smiled despite herself. Another something. Go ahead. Do you ever regret it? The life you chose? Damien's expression darkened. Every day. The rawness in his voice startled her. But regret doesn't change anything, he continued. You make choices. You live with them. That's all there is. Claire looked down at her hands. I wish I believed that. You will, Damien said quietly. Eventually. She glanced up, and for a moment their eyes met, really met, and something passed between them, something unspoken but real. Then Damien looked away, and the moment broke. It's late, he said. You should get some rest. Claire stood, her heart still racing. Good night, Damien. He didn't respond. But as she reached the door, she heard his voice, low and rough. Good night, Claire. She smiled all the way back to her room. Assam. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Claire spent her mornings in the gardens, her afternoons in the library, and her evenings with Damien. They didn't talk about anything important, just books and weather and the small, inconsequential things that filled the hours. But the silence between them grew warmer, more comfortable. And Claire found herself looking forward to those evenings more than she wanted to admit. One night, as they sat by the fire, Damien asked her about Michael. What was he like? Claire hesitated, surprised by the question. Kind, she said finally. Gentle. He was good. And you loved him. I did. Her voice cracked slightly. But his family never thought I was good enough. They tolerated me because Michael wanted me. And when he died, they threw you away, Damien finished. Claire nodded, blinking back tears. I keep thinking if I'd been different, maybe they would have... Stop. Damien's voice was firm. Their cruelty isn't your fault. But nothing. He wheeled closer, his gaze intense. You deserved better than them. Better than how they treated you. Claire's breath hitched. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough. The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. Why do you care? She whispered. Damien's jaw tightened. Because no one else does. The words hung in the air, heavy and true. And Claire realized, with a jolt, that she wasn't the only lonely person in this house. A week later, Margaret informed Claire that there would be a dinner party. A what? Claire asked, blinking. A dinner party, Margaret repeated, her tone clipped. Mr. Cross is hosting several business associates. You'll be expected to attend. Claire's stomach twisted. I don't, I'm not good at that kind of thing. You'll manage. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Just smile. Be polite. Let Mr. Cross do the talking. What if I mess up? You won't. Margaret handed her a garment bag. Wear this. Hair up. Minimal jewelry. You'll be fine. Claire took the bag, her hands trembling. When is it? Tomorrow night. Tomorrow? Claire's voice rose. That's not enough time to... It's plenty of time, Margaret said firmly. Mr. Cross has faith in you. Claire doubted that, but she didn't argue. The next evening, Claire stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress was elegant, a deep emerald green that hugged her waist and flowed to the floor. Her hair was pinned up, soft curls framing her face. Margaret had even insisted on makeup, though Claire had kept it subtle. She looked like someone else, someone confident, someone who belonged in a house like this. But inside, she was still the same terrified girl who'd signed her life away in a kitchen. A knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she called. The door opened and Damien wheeled inside. He stopped when he saw her. For a long moment, he just stared, his expression unreadable. "You look," he trailed off. Claire's cheeks burned. "I look ridiculous, don't I?" "No." His voice was rough. "You look beautiful." The word hit her like a physical thing. "Oh," she managed. Damien cleared his throat, his gaze shifting away. "The guests will be arriving soon. Are you ready?" Claire nodded, even though she wasn't. "Good." He turned his wheelchair toward the door. "Stay close to me. Don't answer questions you're not comfortable with. And if anyone makes you uncomfortable, tell me." "Okay." Damien glanced back at her, his eyes dark and serious. "You'll be fine, Claire. I promise." And somehow, she believed him. The dining room had been transformed. The long table was set with crystal and silver, candles flickering in the dim light. A small group of men and women stood near the fireplace, drinks in hand, their laughter filling the room. Claire's stomach churned. Damien wheeled into the room, and the conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward him, and then toward Claire. She forced herself to smile. "Everyone," Damien said, his voice calm and commanding, "this is my wife, Claire." A woman in a sleek black dress stepped forward, her smile sharp. "So you're the mysterious Mrs. Cross. We've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Claire said, her voice steadier than she felt. The woman laughed. "Of course," but her eyes said otherwise. The evening dragged on. Claire smiled and nodded and made small talk, her hands clenched in her lap beneath the table. The guests were polite enough, but she could feel their judgment, their curiosity. They looked at her like a puzzle they couldn't solve, and they looked at Damien like a wounded animal. It made her furious. Halfway through dinner, a man at the far end of the table leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Damien. "So, Cross," he said, his tone casual but pointed. "How's business these days?" Damien's expression didn't change. "Thriving." "Really?" The man smirked. "I heard you'd been scaling back, delegating more." "I have capable people." "Of course." The man's smile widened. "But it's not quite the same, is it? Without you at the helm?" The room went still. Claire's pulse quickened. She could feel the tension radiating off Damien, could see the tightness in his jaw. "Careful, Vincent," Damien said quietly. "You're making assumptions." Vincent shrugged. "Just concerned, that's all. We all are. You've been unwell." "I'm fine." "Are you?" Vincent's gaze flicked to the wheelchair. "Because from where I'm sitting that's enough." Claire's voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone turned to stare at her. Her heart pounded, but she kept her gaze locked on Vincent. "My husband said he's fine. If you don't believe him, that's your problem. But questioning him at his own table is disrespectful." Vincent blinked, clearly taken aback. The woman in the black dress laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. "Well, she's got fire." Damien's hand moved under the table, finding Claire's. He squeezed once, a silent thank you. Vincent's smile faltered. "My apologies, Mrs. Cross. I didn't mean to offend." "Of course you didn't," Claire said sweetly. The conversation shifted after that, the tension easing. But Claire's hands didn't stop shaking until the guests finally left. When the last car pulled away, Claire sagged against the door frame, exhausted. "You did well," Damien said from behind her. She turned, her cheeks flushing. "I probably shouldn't have said that." "You should have." Damien's gaze was intense. "No one's ever defended me like that." Claire's throat tightened. "He was being cruel. He was testing me, and you shut him down." Damien wheeled closer. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Claire said quietly. "I'm your wife. Even if it's just—" "Just what?" She hesitated. "Just on paper." Damien's eyes darkened. "Is that what you think this is?" Claire's breath caught. "Isn't it?" For a long moment, Damien didn't answer. Then he reached out, his hand brushing hers. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but it's starting to feel like more." Claire's heart stuttered. Before she could respond, Damien pulled back, his expression shuddering. "Good night, Claire." "Good night," she whispered. But as she watched him wheel away, she knew something had shifted, and there was no going back. The next morning, Claire woke to chaos. Voices shouted in the hallway. Footsteps pounded on the marble floors. She threw on a robe and rushed out, her heart racing. Margaret stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale. "What's going on?" Claire demanded. "There's been an incident," Margaret said tightly. "Someone broke into one of Mr. Cross's warehouses last night, stole shipments worth millions." Claire's stomach dropped. "Is he—" "He's fine. But he's not happy." That was an understatement. Claire found Damien in his office, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with fury. Two men stood in front of his desk, both looking like they wanted to disappear. "I don't care how it happened," Damien said, his voice deadly quiet. "I care that it did, and I want to know who's responsible." "We're looking into it, sir," one of the men said quickly. "We'll find them." "You'd better." Damien's gaze was ice. "Because if this happens again, you're both done. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Get out." They fled. Claire hesitated in the doorway, unsure if she should leave too, but Damien looked up and saw her. His expression softened, just barely. "Come in," he said. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Damien's jaw tightened. "Someone's testing me, Claire, pushing to see how far they can go." "And?" "And they're about to find out." His voice was hard, dangerous. Claire's chest tightened. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever I have to." The words sent a chill through her, but she didn't look away. "Just be careful," she said quietly. Damien's gaze held hers. "I will." She wanted to say more, to tell him she was worried, that she cared what happened to him, but the words stuck in her throat, so she just nodded and left. Over the next few days, the estate became a fortress. Security doubled. Damien spent hours in his office, making calls, issuing orders. Claire barely saw him, and when she did, he looked exhausted. One night she brought him dinner herself. "You need to eat," she said, setting the tray on his desk. Damien glanced up, surprised. "I'm not hungry." "I don't care." "Eat." He stared at her for a moment, then picked up the fork. Claire sat down across from him, watching him eat in silence. "You don't have to stay," Damien said after a while. "I know." "Then why are you?" Claire met his gaze. "Because I'm worried about you." Damien's expression softened. "You don't need to be." "That's not how it works." He set down the fork, his eyes searching hers. "Claire, I know," she interrupted. "This is just a contract, a business arrangement, but I still—" She stopped, her cheeks flushing. "I still care, whether you want me to or not." Damien's throat worked. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," Claire said quietly, "but you have it anyway." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Damien reached across the desk, his hand covering hers. "Thank you," he said roughly. Claire's heart ached. "You're welcome." 2 days later, Claire woke to find a note slipped under her door. "Meet me in the East Wing, 8 p.m. D." Her pulse quickened. She spent the rest of the day distracted, her mind racing. What did he want? Was something wrong, or was this... She didn't let herself finish the thought. At 8 o'clock, she made her way to the east wing. The door to Damien's room was open. She stepped inside and stopped. The room had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, casting soft light across the space. And in the center of the room, a small table had been set with 2 plates, 2 glasses, and a bottle of wine. Damien sat beside it, watching her. "What is this?" Claire whispered. "An apology," Damien said, "for being an ass the last few days." Claire's chest tightened. "You don't have to." "I do." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." She obeyed, her heart pounding. Damien poured her a glass of wine, his movements careful. "I know this isn't a real marriage, but you've been kinder to me than I deserve, and I wanted to... thank you." Claire's throat tightened. "Damien, let me finish." His gaze was serious. "You didn't ask for this life. You didn't ask to be here. But you've made it bearable, and I..." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I'm grateful." Tears pricked Claire's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." They ate in comfortable silence, the tension from the past few days melting away. And when the meal was over, Damien wheeled closer, his gaze holding hers. "Claire," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her breath caught. "What?" But before he could answer, the door burst open. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face pale. "Mr. Cross," she said urgently, "there's been another incident. The Whitmores are here." Damien's expression went cold. "What?" "They're at the gate, demanding to see Mrs. Cross." Claire's stomach dropped. Damien's jaw tightened. "Let them in." "Are you sure?" "Let them in," he repeated, his voice hard. "It's time we settled this." And Claire knew, with a sinking certainty, that everything was about to change. Claire's hands went cold. The warmth of the candlelit room, the intimacy of the moment they'd been building, all of it evaporated in an instant. Damien had been about to tell her something that felt important, and now the Whitmores were here, tearing through her fragile sense of peace like they always did. "I'll handle this," Damien said, his voice clipped. He was already wheeling toward the door, his shoulders rigid with tension. "No," Claire said, standing abruptly. "I'm coming with you." Damien turned back, his eyes hard. "Claire, they came for me. I'm not hiding." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm done running from them." Something flickered across Damien's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Stay behind me." They made their way down to the foyer together, Margaret trailing at a careful distance. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her chin up, her hands clasped to keep them from shaking. She could hear voices echoing from the entrance hall, Richard's low, authoritative tone, and Ethan's sharper, more agitated one. When they reached the foyer, Claire's stomach twisted. Richard stood near the door in an expensive overcoat, his silver hair immaculate despite the late hour. Beside him, Ethan looked restless, his eyes darting around the grand entrance with barely concealed resentment. And behind them both stood a woman Claire had only seen a handful of times. Victoria Whitmore, Richard's wife, draped in furs and pearls, her face a mask of cold disdain. "Well," Richard said, his gaze settling on Claire. "There she is, the prodigal daughter-in-law." Claire's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "What we want," Victoria said, her voice clipped and aristocratic, "is to ensure our investment is being properly managed." Damien wheeled forward, positioning himself between Claire and the Whitmores. "Your investment," he said quietly, "is none of your business anymore." Richard's smile was thin. "I'm afraid I disagree. We brokered this arrangement, Mr. Cross. We have every right to check in." "You have no rights here," Damien said, his tone ice. "This is my home, my wife, and you're trespassing." Ethan stepped forward, his face flushed. "Trespassing? You wouldn't even have her if it weren't for us. We're the ones who set this up, who made sure you got what you needed." "What I needed," Damien repeated slowly, "was a wife, not a family of vultures circling my property." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "How dare you?" "I dare," Damien cut her off, "because you walked into my house uninvited at night, making demands. So I'll ask once more, what do you want?" Richard's expression hardened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, holding it up. We want assurance, legal assurance that our interests are protected. Your interests? Claire's voice cracked with anger. What interests? You kicked me out. You took everything from me. We gave you a way out, Ethan snapped. You should be thanking us. Thanking you? Claire took a step forward, her fear melting into fury. You sold me like property. You used me to make a deal with him, and now you want to come back and… what? Make sure you're still getting something out of it? Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. You always were dramatic, Claire. This is business, nothing personal. It's personal to me, she shot back. Enough. Damien's voice cut through the room like a whip. You're leaving, now. Richard didn't move. We're not going anywhere until we get what we came for. And what's that? Damien asked, his tone dangerously soft. Richard's gaze shifted to Claire. Her signature. On a legal agreement that ensures any assets she inherits from this marriage revert to the Whitmore estate. Claire's breath caught. You can't be serious. Completely serious, Victoria said coolly. Michael's money, his investments, they belong to this family, not to you. And certainly not to whatever arrangement you've made with Mr. Cross here. There is no arrangement, Claire said, her voice shaking. And even if there were, you have no claim to anything I have. We have every claim, Ethan said. You married into our family. That makes you responsible for… She's not a Whitmore anymore, Damien interrupted, his voice deadly calm. She's a Cross. And you don't touch what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone sent a shiver through Claire. Not fear, but something else. Something that made her chest tighten. Richard's jaw clenched. Mr. Cross, I don't think you understand the position you're in. Enlighten me. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping. You're vulnerable right now. Your business has been hit, your competitors are circling, and we both know you can't afford to lose any more ground. Damien's expression didn't change. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Richard's smile returned, cold and calculating. We can make things very difficult for you, Mr. Cross. Publicly, legally, unless you cooperate. Claire's hands balled into fists. You're blackmailing him? We're protecting our interests, Victoria said primly. By threatening my husband? Your husband, Ethan said with a laugh, can barely protect himself. Look at him. He can't even stand. The words hung in the air like poison. Damien went very still. Claire felt rage flood her veins, hot and violent. Get out! Ethan blinked. Excuse me? I said get out, Claire repeated, her voice rising. Get out of this house before I call security and have you thrown out. Richard's expression darkened. You don't have the authority? She does. Damien's voice was quiet, but it cut through everything. She's my wife. This is her home. And if she wants you gone, you're gone. Richard's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake. No, Damien said. You are. For a moment, Claire thought Richard might actually lunge forward. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with barely restrained fury. But then Victoria placed a hand on his arm. Richard, not here. Richard's gaze swept over Damien, then Claire, cold and venomous. This isn't over. Yes, Damien said softly. It is. Richard turned on his heel and stalked toward the door. Victoria followed, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Ethan lingered for a moment, his expression twisted with contempt. You're going to regret this, Claire, he said. I already regret ever meeting your family, she replied. Ethan's smile was cruel. We'll see how long your new husband can protect you. My guess? Not very long. Then he was gone. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the foyer like a gunshot. Claire stood frozen, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and rage and something close to terror. Damien wheeled closer, his hand finding hers. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She shook her head. No, I'm not. They won't come back. You don't know that, Claire's voice cracked. You heard what Richard said. They're going to come after you, after us. Let them try. Damien. Claire. He squeezed her hand, his gaze fierce. I meant what I said. You're mine. And no one, Not the Whitmores, not anyone is going to take you from me. The intensity in his eyes stole her breath. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? Damien's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he pulled back, his expression shuddering. Go to bed, he said quietly. We'll talk in the morning. But please, Claire. She wanted to argue, to push, but the exhaustion in his voice stopped her. So she nodded and left him there, alone in the foyer, staring at the door the Whitmores had just walked through. But Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over in her mind. The Whitmores weren't going to stop. They were going to keep pushing, keep threatening, until they got what they wanted. And what they wanted was to destroy her. Around 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and wandered down to the kitchen. The house was silent, dark except for the faint glow of security lights through the windows. She made herself tea and sat at the counter, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, trying to calm the racing of her heart. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Claire looked up, expecting Margaret, but it was Damien. He wheeled into the kitchen, his hair disheveled, his expression tired. Can't sleep either? He asked. Claire shook her head. Too much in my head. Damien moved closer, stopping beside the counter. Want to talk about it? Not really, she admitted. I keep thinking about what Richard said, about making things difficult for you. What if he won't? You don't know that. I do. Damien's voice was firm. Because Richard Whitmore is a coward. He threatens and postures, but when it comes down to it, he doesn't have the guts to follow through. Claire wanted to believe him, but fear still gnawed at her. What if you're wrong? Damien's gaze softened. Then I'll handle it. That's what I do, Claire. I handle threats. Even when you're... She stopped, flushing. Even when I'm in a wheelchair? Damien finished, his tone dry. Yes, even then. Claire looked down at her tea. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. Damien reached out, his fingers brushing her wrist. And you're not wrong. This... He gestured to the wheelchair. Makes things harder. But it doesn't make me weak. I know you're not weak, Claire said quietly. I've never thought that. Damien's eyes searched hers. Then what do you think? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Claire's heart pounded. I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. Damien's breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he pulled back, his expression conflicted. You should go back to bed. So should you. I will. He turned his wheelchair toward the door, then paused. Claire? Yeah? Thank you. For tonight. For standing up to them. Claire's chest tightened. You don't have to thank me. I do. He looked back at her, his eyes dark and intense. Because no one's ever done that for me before. Before she could respond, he was gone. Claire sat alone in the kitchen, her tea going cold, and wondered what the hell she was doing. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just a contract. And that terrified her more than anything the Whitmores could do. The next morning, Margaret found Claire in the library. Mr. Cross wants to see you, she said. In his office. Claire's stomach tightened. Is something wrong? I don't think so. He just asked for you. Claire followed Margaret through the house to Damien's office, a room she'd only been in once before. It was large and austere, dominated by a massive desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Damien sat behind the desk, his expression serious. Close the door, he said. Claire obeyed, her pulse quickening. What's going on? Damien gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. We need to talk. She sat, her hands clasped in her lap. About last night? About everything. Damien leaned forward, his gaze steady. The Whitmores aren't going to stop, Claire. You know that. I know. So we need to be smart, strategic. He paused. And we need to be on the same page. Claire frowned. What do you mean? Damien pulled a folder from his desk and slid it across to her. Open it. She did. Inside were legal documents, contracts, deeds, financial statements. Her eyes scanned the pages, confusion mounting. What is this? Protection, Damien said. Everything Michael left you, the house, the accounts, the investments, it's all been transferred into a trust, one that the Whitmores can't touch. Claire's breath caught. How did you? I have lawyers. Good ones. Damien's expression was calm. The Whitmores think they can use legal pressure to get what they want, but they're wrong. As of this morning, everything that belonged to you is legally protected. Tears pricked Claire's eyes. Why would you do that? Because it's yours, Damien said simply. And because they have no right to it. Claire's throat tightened. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Damien's gaze held hers. But there's more. More? He pulled another document from the folder. I'm offering you a choice. You can stay here under the protection of our marriage contract, or... He paused. You can leave. With everything that's yours, free and clear, no strings attached. Claire's heart stopped. You're letting me go? I'm giving you the option, Damien said quietly. You never asked for this life. And now that you're protected from the Whitmores, you don't have to stay if you don't want to. Claire stared at him, her mind reeling. And if I leave? Then the contract is void. You keep everything, and you're free. And you? Damien's expression didn't change. I'll be fine. But she could see the lie in his eyes. Claire's hands trembled as she looked down at the document. Freedom, safety, everything she'd lost when Michael died, handed back to her on a silver platter. All she had to do was sign. But when she looked up at Damien, at the man who'd protected her, defended her, given her back her dignity, she knew she couldn't do it. I'm not leaving, she said. Damien's eyes widened. Claire, I'm not leaving, she repeated, her voice firm. I know this started as a contract, a transaction, but it's not that anymore. At least not for me. You don't owe me anything, Damien said, his voice rough. I know. Claire stood, moving around the desk until she was standing in front of him. But I'm staying anyway. Damien looked up at her, his expression raw. Why? Claire's heart pounded. Because for the first time since Michael died, I don't feel alone, and I think... She swallowed hard. I think maybe you don't either. Damien's jaw tightened. Claire, you don't understand. Then help me understand. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. Then he reached out, his hand finding hers. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. That's not your decision to make. Damien's grip tightened. This life, it's dangerous, complicated. The Whitmores are just the beginning. There are people out there who would hurt you to get to me. I'm not afraid. You should be. Claire knelt down, bringing herself eye level with him. Maybe, but I'm staying anyway. Damien's eyes searched hers, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope. Okay, he said softly. Okay. Okay. He exhaled slowly. But if you stay, we do this right. No more half measures. No more pretending this is just business. Claire's breath caught. What are you saying? Damien's hand came up, his fingers brushing her cheek. I'm saying I want this to be real, if you're willing. Tears spilled down Claire's face. I'm willing. And then Damien pulled her close, and for the first time since they'd met, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was desperate and raw and full of all the things neither of them had been able to say. When they finally pulled apart, Claire was shaking. Damien, she whispered. I know, he said roughly. I know. They stayed like that, foreheads pressed together, until Margaret's voice echoed from the hallway. Mr. Cross, you have a call. Damien pulled back, his expression hardening. Tell them I'll call back. It's urgent, sir. It's about the warehouse. Damien's jaw tightened. He looked at Claire, conflict written all over his face. Go, she said quietly. I'll be here when you're done. He nodded, then wheeled toward the door. But before he left, he looked back. Claire? Yeah? Don't leave. I won't, she promised. And she meant it. It won't. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Claire wandered the estate, her mind spinning, her heart still racing from what had happened in Damien's office. He'd kissed her. He'd asked her to stay, really stay. And she'd said yes. But the fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of her happiness. The Whitmores weren't done. And whatever was happening with Damien's business, the thefts, the threats, it was escalating. By evening, she hadn't seen Damien since the morning. Margaret said he was still on calls, still dealing with whatever crisis had erupted. Claire ate dinner alone in her room, picking at the food without tasting it. She tried to read, but the words blurred together. Finally, she gave up and went to bed early, exhaustion pulling her under despite the anxiety thrumming through her veins. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. Claire bolted upright, her heart pounding. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it, but then she heard it again, the unmistakable crash of glass shattering, followed by shouting. She grabbed her robe and rushed into the hallway. The house was dark except for emergency lights, and she could hear footsteps pounding somewhere below. "Damien?" she called out, her voice shaking. No answer. Claire's pulse raced as she made her way toward the stairs. But before she could reach them, a hand grabbed her arm. She screamed. "It's me!" Margaret hissed, her face pale in the dim light. "Don't go down there. What's happening?" "Intruders. They broke in through the east wing." Claire's blood went cold. "Where's Damien?" "In his office. He's—" Another crash, louder this time. And then Damien's voice, sharp and commanding. "Get her out of here, now!" Margaret pulled Claire back, but she resisted. "I'm not leaving him." "Mrs. Cross, please, no!" Claire wrenched her arm free and ran toward the stairs. She could see figures moving in the foyer below. 3 men, dressed in black, their faces covered. And at the bottom of the stairs, blocking their path, was Damien. Still in his wheelchair, still seemingly helpless, but the look in his eyes was anything but weak. "You picked the wrong house," Damien said, his voice deadly calm. One of the men laughed. "Did we? Because from where I'm standing, you can't do much about it. Try me." The man stepped forward, and that's when everything happened at once. Damien moved. He surged forward in his wheelchair with startling speed, ramming into the man's legs and sending him crashing to the floor. The other 2 lunged, but Damien was faster. His hand shot out, grabbing one by the wrist and twisting hard. The man howled in pain, and then Damien stood. He stood. Claire's breath caught in her throat as Damien rose from the wheelchair, his movements fluid and controlled. He wasn't stumbling, wasn't weak. He was standing like he'd never been paralyzed at all. The remaining intruder froze, his eyes wide behind his mask. "What the—" Damien's fist connected with the man's jaw, and he went down hard. Within seconds, security flooded the foyer, hauling the 3 men to their feet. Damien stood in the center of it all, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing. And then he looked up, straight at Claire, her world tilted. "You can walk," she whispered. Damien's expression cracked. "Claire!" But she was already turning, already running back down the hallway, her heart shattering with every step. Because Damien hadn't been paralyzed at all. He'd been lying to her this entire time. Claire's hands shook as she slammed her bedroom door behind her, her chest heaving with a mix of shock and rage and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. She pressed her back against the door, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. He could walk. The man she'd cared for, talked to, defended, he'd been lying to her the entire time. Every moment she'd sat beside him, every conversation where she'd treated him with kindness because she thought he was broken. It had all been a performance, a test, and she'd failed to see it. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, getting closer. "Claire!" Damien's voice came through the door, rough and urgent. "Open the door." She didn't move. "Claire, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Her voice cracked. "That you've been pretending this whole time? That everything was a lie?" "Not everything," Damien said. "Claire, I need you to listen. I trusted you." The words tore out of her, raw and furious. I thought She couldn't finish. The betrayal was too big, too consuming. Silence stretched on the other side of the door. Then Damien spoke again, his voice quieter. "I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. I know that too." He paused. "But I'm coming in anyway." Before Claire could respond, the door handle turned. She scrambled to her feet as Damien pushed the door open and stepped inside. Stepped. Not wheeled. He stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, and for the first time she saw him as he really was. Not weakened, not diminished, but powerful and whole and terrifying in his control. "Get out," Claire said, her voice shaking. "No." "I said get out." "And I said no." Damien closed the door behind him, his gaze locked on hers. "You want to be angry? Fine. Scream at me. Throw things. Whatever you need. But you're going to hear me out first." Claire's hands clenched into fists. "Why should I listen to anything you say? You lied to me for months." "I did." The admission should have made her feel vindicated, but it only made the ache in her chest worse. "Why?" she whispered. Damien's jaw tightened. "Because I had to know." "Know what?" "Who I could trust." He took a step closer. "The explosion was real, Claire. The injuries were real. I was in a coma for 2 weeks, and when I woke up, I couldn't move my legs." Claire's breath caught, confusion mixing with her anger. "But you're walking now." "Because I recovered," Damien said, "faster than anyone expected. The doctor said it was a miracle, but I didn't tell anyone." "Why not?" "Because weakness reveals truth." His voice was hard. "When people think you're broken, they show you who they really are. My business partners started making moves behind my back. My competitors got bolder. People I'd trusted for years started positioning themselves to take what was mine." Claire's throat tightened. "So you let them think you were helpless?" "Yes." "And I watched, waited, figured out exactly who I was dealing with." "And me?" Claire's voice cracked. "Was I part of that test too?" Damien's expression shifted, something raw and pained crossing his features. "At first, yes. The honesty was like a knife." "The marriage was strategic," Damien continued. "I needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. Someone the Whitmores could provide as part of our arrangement. I didn't expect—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I didn't expect you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you were supposed to be just another piece on the board," Damien said roughly. "Someone who'd play the role and stay out of my way. But you didn't. You talked to me, cared for me, treated me like I was still human when everyone else looked at me like I was already dead." Tears burned Claire's eyes. "So you used that. Used my kindness." "Yes." Damien's voice was barely above a whisper. "And I'm not asking you to forgive me for it. But you need to understand, I couldn't tell you. If you'd known I could walk, you would have acted differently. And I needed everyone to believe the lie." "Everyone," Claire repeated bitterly, "including me." "Especially you." Damien took another step forward. "Because you were the only one who mattered." Claire's breath hitched. Don't do that." "Do what?" "Try to make this romantic. You lied to me, Damien. You let me fall for someone who didn't exist." "I exist," Damien said fiercely. "Everything I told you was real, my past, my mistakes, the things I've done, all of it. The only thing I hid was this." He gestured to his legs. "And I did it because I had to." "You didn't have to lie to me." "Yes, I did." Damien's eyes blazed. "Because if I'd told you the truth, you would have looked at me differently, treated me differently. And I needed to know. I needed to see if someone could care about me when they thought I had nothing left to offer." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Claire wiped at her eyes, her anger warring with something else, something that felt like understanding, even though she didn't want it to. "That's not fair," she whispered. "I know. You can't test people like that. It's cruel." "I know that too." Damien's voice roughened. "But I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who only want what I can give them. Power, money, protection. No one's ever just wanted me." Claire's chest ached. "So you thought if you pretended to be broken, you'd find someone who did?" "I didn't think I'd find anyone at all," Damien admitted. "And then you showed up, and you were kind for no reason. And you stayed when you didn't have to, and I—" He stopped, his throat working. "I fell for you anyway." The confession cracked something open inside Claire. "You can't say things like that," she said, her voice breaking. "Not after what you did." "I know." Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could see the pain in his eyes. "But it's true. And I need you to know what happened between us, what I felt. That was real. All of it. Claire wanted to believe him. Part of her did believe him, but the betrayal was still too fresh, too raw. I need time, she said quietly. Damien's expression cracked. How much time? I don't know. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. I can't look at you right now without seeing the lie. For a long moment, Damien just stood there, his hands flexing at his sides like he wanted to reach for her but knew he couldn't. Okay, he said finally. Take the time you need. But Claire? What? Don't leave. His voice was rough. Please. Whatever else happens, don't leave. Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she wouldn't, wanted to promise him the same thing she had that morning in his office, but the words wouldn't come. So she just nodded, once, and Damien left. When the door closed behind him, Claire sank onto the bed and let herself cry. The next 3 days were hell. Claire stayed in her room most of the time, venturing out only when she was sure Damien wouldn't be around. Margaret brought her meals, her expression carefully neutral, and didn't ask questions Claire wouldn't have been able to answer anyway. She replayed everything in her mind, every conversation, every moment, every look, trying to separate what had been real from what had been performance. And the worst part was, she couldn't tell, because Damien had been right about one thing. He hadn't lied about who he was. Just what he could do. But wasn't that enough? On the 4th day, Margaret knocked on her door with a message. Mr. Cross asked me to tell you that the men who broke in have been dealt with, she said. They were hired by the Whitmores. All 3 are cooperating with law enforcement now. Claire's stomach twisted. The Whitmores sent them? Yes. Margaret's expression was grim. They were attempting to steal documents from Mr. Cross's office. Financial records. Things that could be used to discredit him publicly. Claire's hands clenched. And now? Now they're in custody, and Mr. Cross has filed formal charges. Against the men? Against the Whitmores. Claire's breath caught. All of them? All of them. Margaret paused. He's been building a case for weeks, Mrs. Cross. Evidence of fraud, coercion, blackmail, everything they've done. To you, to others, it's all documented. And as of this morning, the prosecutors have enough to move forward. Claire sat down heavily on the bed. Why didn't he tell me? Margaret's expression softened. I think he wanted to protect you from it, until he was certain he could win. Or he didn't trust me to handle it. Or that. Margaret didn't sugarcoat it. Mr. Cross doesn't trust easily, Mrs. Cross. I think you know that by now. Claire did know, but it didn't make it hurt less. Is there anything else? She asked quietly. Margaret hesitated. He asked me to tell you that if you want to see the evidence, the case against the Whitmores, it's available. He thought you might want to know what they've done. Claire's throat tightened. Okay. I'll have it brought to you. After Margaret left, Claire sat alone in the silence, her mind spinning. The Whitmores were going down. Everything they'd done, everything they'd taken from her, was finally coming back to destroy them. And Damien had made it happen. Part of her wanted to feel grateful, vindicated, but mostly she just felt tired. An hour later, there was another knock. Come in, Claire called. The door opened, and Damien stepped inside. Claire's heart stuttered. She hadn't seen him since that night, and the sight of him standing there, tall, whole, undeniably real, sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest. I know you said you needed time, Damien said, but I thought you should know. The Whitmores have been arrested. Claire blinked. Already? Richard and Victoria are in custody now. Ethan turned himself in an hour ago. Damien's expression was hard. They're being charged with conspiracy, fraud, attempted theft, and blackmail, among other things. How long will they— Years, Damien said. If the prosecutors do their job right, they'll be in prison for a very long time. Bitch, Claire should have felt relieved, triumphant even. But all she felt was hollow. Thank you, she said quietly. Damien's jaw tightened. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You did this for me. I did it for us. He took a step closer. They hurt you, Claire, and no one gets away with that. The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver through her. Not fear, but something warmer. Something she wasn't ready to name. Damien, she started. I know. He held up a hand. You're still angry. You have every right to be, but I need you to understand something. What? I would do it again. His eyes were fierce. The lie, the test, all of it. Because it's the only way I would have found you, and I'm not sorry for that. Claire's breath caught. You should be. Maybe. Damien's gaze didn't waver. But I'm not. The honesty was brutal, and somehow it made everything worse and better at the same time. I don't know what you want from me, Claire whispered. I want you to forgive me, Damien said, but I know I don't deserve it. So I'll settle for you just staying, for giving me a chance to prove that what we have is real. And if I can't, pain flickered across his face. Then I'll accept it, but I'll spend every day trying to change your mind. Claire's chest ached. She wanted to tell him it was too late, that the damage was done. But the truth was, she didn't know if it was. Because despite everything, she still cared about him, and that terrified her more than anything. I need more time, she said finally. Damien nodded, his expression carefully controlled. Okay? He turned to leave, but Claire's voice stopped him. Damien? He looked back. Why today? She asked. Why reveal everything now? You could have kept pretending. Damien's expression softened. Because it's your birthday. Claire's breath caught. She'd forgotten. In all the chaos, she'd completely forgotten. And I wanted to give you the truth, Damien continued quietly. Even if it meant losing you. Before Claire could respond, he was gone. She sat alone in the silence, her heart pounding, and realized that Damien Cross was either the most honest liar she'd ever met or the most dangerous man she'd ever fallen for. Maybe both. That evening, Claire finally left her room. She wandered down to the library, needing something, anything, to distract her from the storm inside her head. But when she opened the door, she stopped short. The room had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm light across the space. And in the center of the room sat a small table with a single chair, a covered plate, and an envelope. Claire's throat tightened as she moved closer and picked up the envelope. Inside was a card, handwritten in Damien's sharp, precise script. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to have this anyway. Happy birthday, Claire. D. She lifted the cover off the plate and found a single slice of chocolate cake, her favorite, though she'd never told him that. Except she had. Weeks ago, in passing, during one of their quiet conversations. And he'd remembered. Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks as she sank into the chair. She picked up the fork with trembling hands and took a bite. And it was perfect. Everything about this was perfect. And that was the problem. Because Damien knew her. Really knew her. Not the version the Whitmores had tried to destroy, but the person she actually was underneath all the grief and fear. And despite the lie, despite the betrayal, part of her still wanted to believe in him. She finished the cake in silence, then made her way upstairs. But instead of going to her room, she found herself standing outside Damien's door. She knocked before she could talk herself out of it. Come in. Claire pushed the door open. Damien sat by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and the sight of him standing, always standing now, still sent a jolt through her. Thank you, she said, for the cake. Damien's expression was guarded. You're welcome. Can we talk? He gestured to the chair across from him. Always. Claire sat, her hands clasped in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. I've been thinking. About? About what you said. About needing to know who you could trust. She met his gaze. And I get it. I do. But you have to understand. Trust goes both ways. Damien's jaw tightened. I know. Do you? Claire leaned forward. Because you tested me, Damien. You put me through hell to see if I'd pass, but you never gave me the same chance. You never trusted me with the truth. You're right, Damien said quietly, and I'm sorry for that. Are you? Claire's voice shook. Or are you just sorry you got caught? Damien set down his glass and leaned forward, his eyes intense. I'm sorry I hurt you. That was never my intention. But you did it anyway. Yes. His voice was rough. Because I'm not a good man, Claire. I've done terrible things, hurt people, destroyed lives. And I told myself the lie was just another necessary evil. But the truth is, he stopped, his throat working. The truth is I was scared. Claire blinked. Of what? Of you. Damien's gaze held hers. Of what you made me feel, because the moment I told you the truth, everything would change, and I wasn't ready to lose you. So you kept lying. So I kept lying, Damien admitted. And I know that makes me a coward. Claire's chest ached. You're not a coward, Damien. You're just... She struggled for the words. You're just broken in different ways than I thought. Damien's expression cracked. Does that mean you understand? I don't know, Claire said honestly. But I'm trying. That's all I'm asking. Claire stood, her hands trembling. I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more lies. Her voice was firm. Ever. I don't care how small or how necessary you think they are. If we're going to do this, if we're going to be real, then I need the truth. Always. Damien stood as well, closing the distance between them. I promise. Even if the truth hurts? Especially then. His hand came up, cupping her face. No more lies, Claire. I swear it. Claire searched his eyes, looking for any hint of deception, but all she saw was raw, desperate honesty. Okay, she whispered. Damien's thumb brushed her cheek. Does this mean you forgive me? I don't know yet, Claire admitted, but I want to try. Then we'll try together. And when Damien kissed her this time, it felt different, less desperate, more real, like the beginning of something true. The next few weeks were strange. The Whitmores were in jail awaiting trial, and the media had picked up the story. Claire's name was mentioned in several articles, always as the widow, always as the victim, and it made her skin crawl. But Damien's lawyers handled it, issuing statements and keeping the worst of the attention away from her. Meanwhile, Damien made good on his promise. He told her everything about his business, his enemies, the people who tried to take advantage of his apparent weakness. He showed her the evidence he'd gathered, the meticulous case he'd built against the Whitmores over months of careful observation. And slowly, painfully, Claire began to trust him again. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when she looked at him and remembered the lie, when the hurt flared up fresh and sharp. But there were also moments when she saw past it, when she saw the man who'd protected her, defended her, given her back her life. And in those moments, she let herself fall a little deeper. One evening, as they sat in the library, Damien asked her a question. What do you want, Claire? She looked up from her book. What do you mean? With your life, Damien said. Now that you're free from the Whitmores, what do you want to do? Claire set the book aside, considering. I don't know. I haven't thought about it. Think about it now. She frowned. Why? Because you've spent so long surviving, Damien said quietly. I want to know what living looks like for you. The question caught her off guard. For so long, she'd just been trying to get through each day. She hadn't let herself imagine a future. I used to want to work, she said slowly. Before I married Michael, I had plans. I wanted to work in a museum, curate exhibits, tell stories through art. So do it. Claire blinked. What? Do it, Damien repeated. You have the degree, the passion. What's stopping you? Claire struggled for an answer. I don't know if I can. Why not? Because I've been out of it for so long, and She stopped, her throat tightening. I'm scared. Damien reached across the space between them, taking her hand. Then be scared and do it anyway. Claire's eyes burned. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, Damien said, but it's possible, and I'll help you, whatever you need. Why? Because you deserve to be more than just my wife, Damien said. You deserve to be yourself. The words broke something open inside her, and for the first time in years, Claire let herself imagine a future that was more than just survival. 2 weeks later, Claire stood in front of a small art gallery in the city, her hands shaking. Damien stood beside her, his presence steady and grounding. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I know. Claire took a deep breath. But I want to. Inside, the gallery owner was waiting, a woman named Helen who'd been friends with Claire's mother years ago. When Claire had reached out, asking about opportunities, Helen had offered her a position on the spot, assistant curator, part-time, nothing glamorous, but it was a start. "Ready?" Damien asked. Claire nodded. "Ready?" She walked inside, and Damien waited outside, watching through the glass as she shook Helen's hand and smiled. A real smile. Not the hollow one she'd worn for so long. And for the first time since the accident, since Michael's death, since everything fell apart, Claire felt like she was building something again. Something that was hers. That night she came home, because it was home now, not just Damien's estate, and found him in the library. "How did it go?" he asked. "Good." Claire sank into the chair across from him, exhausted but happy. "Really good." Damien smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made her chest ache. "I'm proud of you." "You don't have to be." "I am anyway." Claire's throat tightened. "Thank you for pushing me, for believing I could do this." "You didn't need me to believe," Damien said. "You just needed to believe in yourself." Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man who'd lied to her, but the man who'd given her back her life. "I think I'm ready," she said quietly. Damien's expression grew cautious. "Ready for what?" "To forgive you." Claire's voice shook. "I'm not saying it doesn't still hurt, but I understand why you did it, and I think—" She swallowed hard. "I think I love you anyway." Damien went very still. "Claire, I love you," she repeated, stronger this time. "Even though you're infuriating and secretive and you test people like they're chess pieces. I love you." Damien crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "I love you too," he said roughly, "more than I've ever loved anything." And when they kissed this time, it felt like coming home, like finding the place they were always meant to be. The trial started a month later. Claire sat in the courtroom beside Damien, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as the prosecutors laid out the case against the Whitmores. Fraud, coercion, blackmail, theft. The list went on and on. Richard sat at the defendant's table, his face carved from stone. Victoria looked pale and shaken. And Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. When it was Claire's turn to testify, she stood and walked to the witness stand with her head high. And she told the truth. About the contract they'd forced her to sign. About the threats. About the way they'd used her grief to manipulate her into a marriage she hadn't wanted. She didn't cry, didn't break. She just told the truth. And when she was finished, she walked back to her seat beside Damien, who took her hand and squeezed once. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty. On all counts. Richard was sentenced to 15 years, Victoria to 12, Ethan to 10, and Claire felt nothing but relief. That night, Damien took her out to the balcony overlooking the estate. "It's over," he said quietly. Claire nodded. "It's over. How do you feel?" She considered the question. "Free." Damien pulled her close, and they stood together in the darkness, the city lights glittering in the distance. "What happens now?" Claire asked. "Whatever we want," Damien said. "We build a life. Together." Claire looked up at him, her heart full. "I'd like that." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Claire believed in happy endings again. Claire woke the morning after the verdict to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows, and Damien's arm wrapped around her waist. For a moment, she just lay there, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the rise and fall of his chest against her back. It was the kind of peace she'd thought she'd lost forever when Michael died. The kind that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. But peace, she was learning, didn't mean the fight was over. Damien stirred behind her, his hand tightening briefly before he pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "You're awake." "So are you." "I've been awake for an hour," he admitted, "watching you sleep." Claire turned in his arms to face him. "That's creepy." "Probably." His mouth curved into a half smile. "But you looked peaceful. I didn't want to ruin it." She studied his face, the sharp angles softened by morning light, the scar at his temple she'd traced with her fingers 100 times, the eyes that had once seemed so cold but now looked at her with something that made her chest ache. What happens now? She asked quietly. Damien's expression grew serious. Now we rebuild. The Whitmores are in prison. Your business is secure. What's left to rebuild? Us, Damien said simply. A real life, not one built on contracts and lies. Claire's throat tightened. I thought we already started that. We did. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But there's still something we need to deal with. Her stomach nodded. What? Your house. The one Michael bought for you. Claire had barely thought about that house in weeks. It had been the epicenter of her grief, the place where she'd lost everything. What about it? It's still yours, Damien said. Legally protected, remember? The question is what you want to do with it. Claire pulled back slightly, sitting up against the headboard. I don't know. I haven't been back since... I know. Damien sat up beside her. But you need to decide, keep it, sell it, burn it to the ground, whatever you need. But you can't let it just sit there like a ghost. He was right. She knew he was right. That house represented everything she'd been running from. The grief, the loss, the version of herself that had been broken and helpless. I want to go see it, she said finally. Today. Damien's eyes searched hers. Are you sure? No? Claire managed a weak smile. But I'm going anyway. Ichan. The drive took 40 minutes. Claire sat in the passenger seat of Damien's car. He drove now, had been driving for weeks, though she still caught herself expecting to see the wheelchair, and watched the familiar street slide past. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her heart pounding harder with every mile. Damien reached over and covered her hand with his. We can turn around. No. Claire took a shaky breath. I need to do this. When they pulled up in front of the house, Claire's breath caught. It looked exactly the same, the white siding, the blue shutters, the small garden she'd planted the first spring she and Michael had moved in. But it also looked abandoned. The grass was overgrown, the windows dark, and there was a loneliness to it that made her chest ache. Take your time, Damien said quietly. Claire nodded and got out of the car. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked up the front path, her hand trembling as she pulled out the keys she hadn't touched in months. The lock stuck slightly, but then it turned and she pushed the door open. The smell hit her first, stale air and dust and something that might have been grief itself. She stepped inside, and memories crashed over her like waves. Michael laughing in the kitchen, Michael carrying her over the threshold, Michael kissing her goodbye that last morning, telling her he loved her, never knowing he wouldn't come home. Claire's vision blurred. She moved through the room slowly, touching things. The banister, the door frame, the countertop where she'd signed the marriage contract to Damien. Every surface held a ghost. She found Damien in the living room, standing by the window, his hands in his pockets. This was his favorite spot, Claire said, her voice rough. He'd stand right there every morning with his coffee, looking out at the street. Damien turned to her. He had good taste. In houses or in wives? Both. There was no jealousy in Damien's voice, just quiet understanding. He loved you. I know. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. And I loved him, but he's gone. And I can't... Her voice broke. I can't keep living in the past. Damien crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Then don't. Claire pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since the funeral. For Michael. For the life they'd planned. For the girl she'd been who'd thought love meant forever. When she finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears, but she felt lighter. I want to sell it, she said. Damien nodded. Okay. And I want to use the money to do something good, something Michael would have wanted. Like what? Claire thought for a moment, then smiled through her tears. A scholarship fund for art students, kids who want to work in museums but can't afford the education. Damien's expression softened. That's perfect. Yeah? Claire wiped her eyes. You don't think it's too... It's not too anything, Damien said firmly. It's exactly right. Claire looked around the house one last time, then back at Damien. Can we go home now? Absolutely. As they walked out and Claire locked the door behind her, she felt something shift. The house wasn't a grave anymore. It was just a building. And Michael wasn't a ghost. He was a memory, one she could carry without it crushing her. She was free. The next few months passed in a blur of change. The house sold quickly, too quickly, Claire thought, but Damien's lawyers handled everything, and the money went straight into the scholarship fund. Claire threw herself into the work at the gallery, curating her first small exhibit and discovering she still had the eye for it, the passion she thought she'd lost. And at night, she went home to Damien. They fought sometimes, about his secretive nature, about her tendency to shut down when things got hard, about stupid things like who left the coffee pot on and whether the library needed better lighting. But they also laughed, made love, built something that felt real and solid in theirs. One evening, as Claire was getting ready for bed, Damien appeared in the doorway with an envelope. "What's that?" she asked. "Open it." Claire took the envelope, her heart racing. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a legal document. She scanned it quickly, then looked up at Damien in shock. "This is a new marriage contract," Damien said, "one that nullifies the old one completely." Claire's hands shook. "Why?" "Because I don't want you bound to me by lawyers and clauses and obligations." Damien stepped closer. "I want you to choose me. Every day. And I want to choose you back." "Damien, read the rest." Claire looked down at the document. It was short, simple, and devastating in its honesty. This contract acknowledges that Claire Cross enters this marriage of her own free will, with no coercion, manipulation, or obligation beyond mutual love and respect. Either party may dissolve this union at any time, for any reason, with no financial or legal penalty. This marriage is built on trust. Nothing else matters. Claire's vision blurred. "You're giving me an out." "I'm giving you a choice," Damien corrected. "The choice I never gave you before." "What if I choose to leave?" Pain flickered across his face. "Then I'll let you go." Claire set the document aside and crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. "You're an idiot." Damien blinked. "What?" "You're an idiot if you think I'd leave now, after everything we've been through, after everything we've built." "Claire, I choose you," she said fiercely. "Every day, every hour, every minute, I choose you. And you don't get to act surprised about it." Damien's arms came around her, crushing her against him. "I love you." "I know." Claire pulled back just enough to look at him. "Now tear up that stupid contract. But tear it up. We don't need it." Damien searched her eyes, then slowly, deliberately took the document and ripped it in half. "There," Claire said, smiling. "Now we're married for real." And when Damien kissed her, it felt like a vow. 3 months later, Claire stood in the gallery, overseeing the installation of a new exhibit. It was her first solo project, a collection exploring grief and transformation through contemporary art, and she was terrified it would fail. "Stop frowning," Helen said, appearing at her elbow. "You're going to give yourself wrinkles." Claire huffed a laugh. "I just want it to be perfect." "It is perfect." Helen squeezed her shoulder. "Trust me. You did good." The opening was that night, and Claire spent the afternoon obsessively adjusting lighting and labels until Helen physically removed her from the building. "Go home," Helen ordered. "Get dressed. Come back at 7 looking like the brilliant curator you are." Claire obeyed reluctantly. When she got home, she found Damien in his office, on the phone. He glanced up when she entered, his expression softening. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then hung up. "How's the exhibit?" Terrifying. Damien stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "You're going to be amazing." "You have to say that. You're contractually obligated." "Actually, we tore up the contract, remember?" He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'm saying it because it's true." Claire leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent, coffee and expensive cologne and something uniquely him. "Will you come tonight?" "I wouldn't miss it." The opening was a success. More people showed up than Claire had expected, filling the small gallery with conversation and laughter and genuine appreciation for the work. Claire moved through the crowd in a daze, answering questions and accepting compliments, still half convinced she was dreaming. Damien stood at the back of the room, watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. When the crowd finally thinned, Helen pulled Claire aside. "There's someone who wants to meet you." She led Claire to a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, impeccably dressed, with kind eyes. Claire, this is Marcus Chen. He's the director of the Metropolitan Museum. Claire's heart stopped. The Met? As in, the one in New York, yes. Marcus extended his hand. I was very impressed by your work tonight. You have a remarkable eye for narrative. Thank you, Claire managed, shaking his hand. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you, Marcus continued. We're looking for someone to curate a new contemporary wing. It's a significant position, and I think you'd be perfect for it. Claire's mind went blank. What? Marcus smiled. Think about it. Here's my card. Call me when you're ready to talk details. He left, and Claire stood frozen, the business card clutched in her hand. Helen squeezed her arm. Did that just happen? I think so? Claire's voice was faint. Oh my God. She found Damien by the door. Did you know about this? About what? Marcus Chen, the Met, She waved the card. All of it. Damien's expression was carefully neutral. I may have mentioned your name to a few people. Damien. What? He grinned. You're talented. People should know about you. Claire wanted to be angry, but she was too stunned. The Met, Damien, the actual Metropolitan Museum. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. Damien's expression grew serious. Then don't do it. But if you want it, if you really want it, don't let fear stop you. Claire looked down at the card, her heart racing. A year ago, she'd been a widow with nothing. Now she was being offered a position at one of the most prestigious museums in the world. I need to think about it, she said finally. Take all the time you need. Damien pulled her close. I'm proud of you either way. Claire leaned into him, overwhelmed and grateful and terrified all at once, but also happy, so incredibly happy. 2 weeks later, Claire sat across from Marcus Chen in a sleek Manhattan office, negotiating the terms of her new position. It would mean traveling back and forth between the city and home, long hours, immense pressure, but it was also everything she'd ever dreamed of. I'll need flexibility, Claire said. I have a life outside of work now. A husband. I can't sacrifice that. Marcus nodded. Understood. We can work out a schedule that allows for remote work and adjusted hours. The important thing is your vision for the space. They talked for 2 hours, and by the end, Claire had signed a contract, this one entirely her own choice. When she got home that night, Damien was waiting in the library with champagne. You took the job, he said. It wasn't a question. I took the job. Claire grinned. Are you okay with that? Are you kidding? I'm thrilled. Damien poured them each a glass. To Claire Cross, museum curator and general badass. They clinked glasses and Claire felt tears prick her eyes. This is really happening. It really is. I couldn't have done it without you. Damien's expression grew soft. Yes, you could have. You just needed to remember who you were. Claire set down her glass and crossed to him, straddling his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. Thank you for everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Always, Damien murmured against her lips. They made love right there in the library, slow and sweet and full of promise. And afterward, as they lay tangled together on the couch, Claire felt a peace so profound it scared her. What are you thinking? Damien asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. That I'm happy, Claire said. Really, truly happy. And that scares me. Why? Because the last time I was this happy, I lost everything. Damien's arm tightened around her. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. I can try. He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. I love you, Claire. And I'm not going anywhere. Not if I can help it. Claire searched his eyes and saw the truth there. I love you too. Good. Damien kissed her forehead. Because you're stuck with me now. God. 6 months later, Claire stood in the newly renovated contemporary wing of the Metropolitan Museum, watching people move through the space she'd designed. It had taken months of work, long flights, endless meetings, brutal deadlines, but it was done. And it was beautiful. Damien stood beside her, his hand in hers, surveying the crowd. You did it, he said quietly. We did it, Claire corrected. I couldn't have managed this without you picking up the slack at home. Damien snorted. You mean Without me learning how to cook? Among other things, they'd found a rhythm over the past months, one that involved compromise and communication and occasionally screaming at each other over logistics. But they'd made it work, because they both wanted it to work. Marcus appeared, beaming. Claire, the reviews are phenomenal. The Times called it a triumph of narrative curation. Claire flushed. I just did what felt right. Well, it worked. Marcus clapped her on the shoulder. This is just the beginning. We're going to do great things together. After he left, Claire turned to Damien. I can't believe this is my life now. Believe it. Damien pulled her close. You earned it. They left the museum together as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. And as they walked through the crowded streets, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind she'd clung to after Michael died, but something stronger, something built on solid ground. 1 year after the trial, Claire stood in the cemetery under a cloudless sky. She'd brought flowers, white roses, Michael's favorite, and she laid them gently on his grave. Hi, she said softly. It's been a while. The stone was weathered now, the edges softened by time and rain. Claire knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. I wanted you to know I'm okay, she continued. Better than okay, actually. I'm happy. I have a job I love, a life I love. And she paused, her throat tightening. I fell in love again. I know you'd want me to move on, but I still feel guilty sometimes, like I'm betraying you. The wind rustled through the trees, soft and gentle. But I think you'd like him, Claire said. He's nothing like you. He's harder, more complicated. But he makes me feel safe, and he believes in me, and I think... She smiled through her tears. I think he loves me as much as you did. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes. Thank you for everything you gave me, Michael. For loving me when I needed it most. I'll never forget you. She turned and walked back to where Damien waited by the car, his expression soft with understanding. You okay? He asked. Claire nodded. I am. He opened the car door for her, and as they drove away, Claire looked back one last time at the grave. Then she turned forward, toward the future, toward the life she was building. And she didn't look back again. 2 years after their wedding, Claire discovered she was pregnant. She found out on a random Tuesday morning, staring at the positive test in the bathroom of the gallery while her heart hammered in her chest. She and Damien had talked about kids, vaguely, theoretically, but this felt sudden and terrifying and wonderful all at once. That night, she found Damien in his office, buried in paperwork. I need to tell you something, she said. Damien looked up, his expression immediately concerned. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Claire crossed to him, her hands shaking. I'm pregnant. Damien went very still. You're pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think. For a moment, Damien just stared at her. Then he stood abruptly, crossed to her in 3 long strides, and kissed her so fiercely she forgot to breathe. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. We're having a baby. We're having a baby? Claire confirmed, laughing through her tears. Damien dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against her still flat stomach. Hi there, kid. I'm your dad, and I'm going to do my best not to screw this up. Claire's heart melted. You're going to be a great father. You think so? I know so. Damien stood, pulling her into his arms. I love you. I love you too. Claire pressed her face against his chest. This is really happening. It really is. The pregnancy was harder than Claire expected. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made working difficult. And 1,000 fears about whether she'd be a good mother. But Damien was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her feet when they ached, talking to the baby every night before bed. 7 months later, Claire went into labor at 3 a.m. The birth was long and painful and terrifying. But when the doctor finally placed their son in her arms, Claire forgot all of it. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and screaming, but perfect. Damien stood beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. He's beautiful. He has your eyes, Claire said, exhausted but grinning. And your stubbornness, if that screaming is any indication. They named him Thomas, after Claire's father, and took him home to the estate 3 days later. The house that had once felt cold and isolated now felt warm and alive, filled with baby cries and laughter and the chaos of new parenthood. Claire had never been so tired or so happy in her life. 1 year after Thomas was born, Claire stood on the balcony overlooking the city, her son asleep in her arms. The lights glittered below and the night was clear and cool. Damien joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" Claire smiled. "How different everything is now. 2 years ago, I was kneeling in the rain at Michael's grave, thinking my life was over. And now—" She looked down at Thomas, then up at Damien. "Now I have this. You, him, a life I never imagined." Damien pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you regret any of it? The pain, the fear, the Whitmores?" Claire considered. "No, because it brought me here, to you. Even though I lied to you? Even though—" She turned to face him. "You gave me my life back, Damien. Not the one I had before. Something better." Damien's eyes were soft. "You did the same for me." They stood together in the darkness, their son sleeping peacefully between them, and Claire felt a contentment so deep it scared her, but she wasn't running from it anymore. She was finally home. 5 years later, Claire stood in the same gallery where she'd curated her first exhibit, surrounded by friends and colleagues and family. The Metropolitan Museum had loaned several pieces for a retrospective of her work, and the turnout was overwhelming. Damien stood near the back with Thomas, now a rambunctious 6-year-old, on his shoulders, both of them grinning. Helen appeared at Claire's elbow. "Look at you. From assistant curator to one of the most respected names in contemporary art. How does it feel?" Claire looked around the room, at the life she'd built, the work she'd created, the people she loved. "It feels right." "It should." Helen squeezed her arm. "You earned every bit of it." After the event, Claire, Damien, and Thomas walked home through the city streets. Thomas chattered endlessly about dinosaurs and spaceships, and whatever 6-year-olds found fascinating, and Claire felt a wave of love so strong it nearly knocked her over. "You okay?" Damien asked, noticing her expression. "Yeah," Claire smiled. "Just grateful." That night, after Thomas was asleep, Claire and Damien sat on the balcony with glasses of wine, watching the city lights. "Do you ever think about how we started?" Claire asked. "All the time." "Do you regret it? The lie?" Damien was quiet for a long moment. "I regret hurting you, but I don't regret what it led to." Claire nodded. She understood. Because the truth was, they'd both been broken when they met. Both lost in different ways. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful. "I wouldn't change anything," she said finally. Damien looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. "Neither would I." They sat in comfortable silence, and Claire thought about the girl she'd been, kneeling in the rain, grief-stricken and alone, thinking she had nothing left. She'd been wrong. She'd had everything. She just hadn't known it yet. Because sometimes the worst moments led to the best ones. Sometimes losing everything meant finding something better. And sometimes the person you least expected became the one you couldn't live without. Claire looked at Damien, at the man who'd tested her, protected her, loved her when she didn't think she deserved it, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And real, she'd learned, was always better than perfect. "I love you," she said. Damien smiled, pulling her close. "I love you too." And under the stars, with the city glowing below them and their son sleeping safely inside, Claire finally understood what it meant to be whole. Not healed, not without scars, but whole. And that was enough.